It was supposed to be just another peaceful Saturday morning at the lake, birds chirping, the water calm, and the sun glinting off the ripples like little diamonds. I had my coffee in one hand and the dock in my sights. But as I approached the shoreline, my heart sank and my blood pressure rose. There it was, a massive pontoon boat I didn't recognize, tied snugly to my private dock like it belonged there. And who was sitting on the bench next to it? None other than the neighborhood's biggest self-proclaimed authority, Karen, sunglasses perched on her nose, iced latte in hand, and a look of smug satisfaction that could curdle milk. I stopped walking for a second, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I was so baffled that someone would have the audacity to use my property without asking. Karen looked up, barely acknowledging me, and said with a tone as dry as her oversized sun hat, "Oh, don't worry. I'll only be a few hours." HOA policy allows community docking for events and weekends. I blinked. "Excuse me?" I asked, trying to keep the irritation out of my voice. "Karen, this is my dock. This isn't HOA property. You can't just park your boat here like it's a community marina." She rolled her eyes, clearly uninterested in whatever facts I was about to throw at her. "Actually, Section 4B of our HOA agreement states that all lake-access homes must allow shared water access," she said, pulling out a laminated piece of paper like she was a courtroom lawyer. I didn't even have to look at it to know she was bluffing. My house wasn't even in her HOA jurisdiction. I bought my property on the east end of the lake almost 10 years ago, long before Karen's cookie-cutter subdivision popped up on the western shore. Their HOA had no control over my land, my shoreline, or anything within 100 feet of my fence line. But Karen didn't care about legalities, she cared about control. This wasn't the first time she'd tried something like this. Last summer she told my guests they couldn't fish off my dock because it set a bad example for the kids in her neighborhood. She once complained that my wind chimes violated her noise expectations. Never mind that she lived nearly 400 feet across the water and probably needed binoculars just to spy. Still, I tried to stay calm. "Karen," I said, pointing to the bright red, "private property" sign I had mounted clearly on the dock post, "you need to move your boat. This is not community access. This is my dock, on my deeded property, and you're trespassing." She actually laughed, a sharp, smug cackle that echoed across the water. "Oh please. You're just being difficult. This lake should be enjoyed by everyone. I have every right to use this space." My jaw clenched. I didn't want a scene. I didn't want a conflict. But I wasn't going to let this woman walk all over me. "No, you don't," I said firmly. "And if you don't untie that boat and leave, I'm calling the sheriff." Her laugh cut off instantly. She stood up like she'd been electrified and shouted, "You'll call the sheriff? Really? For using a dock on a lake that everyone shares? You're insane." She stormed a few steps closer, clutching her coffee like a trophy. "You know what? I'll save you the trouble. I'll call the police. You're harassing me. You threatened me just now." She whipped out her phone and actually dialed 911. "Yes, I'm at the lake," she told the dispatcher. "There's a man yelling at me and threatening to damage my boat. I'm afraid for my safety." I stared at her, stunned. This woman just fabricated an entire crime while standing on my dock. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. There was no yelling. No threats. If anything, I was trying my best not to lose my cool. But Karen wasn't concerned with facts. She was playing a role, painting herself as the victim while standing smack in the middle of someone else's property. She ended the call and looked at me with triumphant eyes. "They're on their way. You better hope they don't arrest you for threatening a woman." I shook my head and pulled out my own phone, not to call the police, but to pull up the property map. I had saved the official county GIS image months ago, just in case something like this ever happened. It showed clearly where my land started, where it ended, and that the dock in question was entirely within my boundaries. I wasn't in the mood to argue anymore. I sat back on the edge of the picnic table near the shed and waited. 10 minutes later, a county deputy pulled up in a patrol SUV. Karen ran up to him like a damsel in distress, her hands waving dramatically. "Thank goodness you're here." He was yelling, threatening me. He said he'd cut my ropes, she exclaimed, pointing at me like I was a wanted criminal. The officer looked at me, calm and professional. I stood up and greeted him politely, then handed over my phone with the property map. "She's on my dock. My deed shows the shoreline belongs to me, including 10 feet into the water. Her HOA doesn't apply to my land," I said clearly. The officer took one look at the map and nodded. "Yeah, this checks out," he said, glancing at Karen. "Ma'am, this is private property. You don't have a right to dock here." Karen's mouth dropped. "But, it's the lake. We're all supposed to have access." "And you do," the officer replied. "But not to someone else's dock. You're going to need to move your boat." Karen wasn't ready to give up. She crossed her arms and huffed. "Well, I'm not moving it right now. I'll have to get someone to help me, and I'm busy. He'll just have to wait." The officer sighed, clearly annoyed. "Ma'am, if you don't move it soon, you could be cited for trespassing." Karen turned red. "Fine," she snapped. "But this isn't over." As she stormed off toward her BMW parked nearby, I had a sinking feeling she wasn't done being dramatic, and I was right. Because what she did next would escalate this little lake spat into one of the most ridiculous, unbelievable showdowns this lake community had ever seen. As Karen stomped off toward her BMW, I thought that maybe, just maybe, she was going to untie her pontoon and be done with it. But clearly, I underestimated the drama brewing behind those designer sunglasses. Instead of walking back to her boat, she sat in her car and started dialing someone on her phone. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but based on her aggressive hand gestures and the way she kept pointing toward my dock, it was clear she was trying to rally backup, maybe from her precious HOA board. I stood there for a moment, debating my next move. The deputy had already left, after warning her one last time to move the boat or face consequences. But now, she was just sitting there. No action. No effort to move. Just waiting, as if refusing to budge would somehow grant her victory. At that point, I decided I'd had enough of playing nice. See, our lake isn't just a weekend fishing hole, it's a community of homeowners, most of whom respect boundaries and common decency. We all maintain our shoreline, pay for private services, and use local operators for dock repairs, towing, and cleanup. I had the number of the towboat guy, Carl, saved in my contacts. He'd helped me retrieve a drifting canoe once. If anyone knew how to remove a trespassing vessel legally and professionally, it was Carl. I gave him a call, explained the situation, sent him a few pictures for proof, and he said, "I'll be there in half an hour. And don't worry, I'll handle her if she gets mouthy." While I waited, I sat back down and opened a cold soda. Karen, still in her car, noticed the towboat approaching from across the lake. She stepped out of the BMW and placed both hands on her hips like a villain out of a Disney movie. "What's he doing here?" she barked. "Removing your boat," I replied calmly. "I've given you plenty of warnings. I even involved the police. You were told to leave, and you didn't. So now, your boat's going for a little ride." She shrieked. "That's my property. You touch that boat, and I'll sue you for everything you've got." Carl was already pulling up beside the dock with his flat pontoon, fitted with a hydraulic winch system. He greeted me with a wave and then looked at Karen. "Ma'am, I've been contracted to remove this vessel from private property. You were told to leave. If you continue to interfere, you'll be obstructing a legal operation." Karen stepped forward, placing herself between Carl and the ropes tied to the dock cleats. I own this boat. You have no right to touch it. Carl didn't flinch. He leaned forward and pointed at the deed I had printed from the county site. Says right here this dock doesn't belong to your HOA. This man owns it outright. And you're trespassing. The shouting started again, but Carl wasn't the type to engage in drama. He radioed his assistant on the towboat to prepare the winch. Before Karen could realize what was happening, the ropes were undone, the pontoon was being secured, and she was spinning in place like a malfunctioning robot. She screamed, "You can't do this. You're all going to jail. You're going to regret this." But her boat was already being pulled away, floating behind Carl's rig like a dog on a leash. And that's when she did something even crazier. Enraged and unwilling to accept defeat, Karen ran back to her BMW. I figured she was finally going to leave and cool off. I was wrong. She whipped the car around in a dramatic three-point turn and floored it, straight toward my boat ramp. Now, this ramp wasn't some open parking lot. It was a narrow concrete path designed for watercraft to be launched and recovered, not for SUVs to hang out. But she parked her car right across it, sideways, completely blocking access from land to water. Then she stepped out, arms folded, lips pursed. Nobody's towing anything else. I'm not leaving until that boat is returned. I couldn't believe it. Her boat was halfway to the marina by now. She was clearly bluffing, but she was doing it with full confidence, as if her BMW had magical jurisdictional powers that overruled property rights. I tried one last time to reason with her. "Karen, you're trespassing again, this time with your car. That ramp is on my land. You're obstructing it." She shouted, "I am the HOA. This whole lake falls under our environmental preservation zone. You should be thanking me." I didn't respond. I just made another call, this time to the local vehicle tow service. Not the lake guys, the heavy-duty truck folks in town. I explained the situation, showed them the same deed when they arrived, and they said, "We've dealt with her before." 20 minutes later, a massive flatbed truck rolled down my gravel driveway. Karen went wide-eyed. She tried to stop the driver, standing in front of her BMW like a protester. The guy stepped out and said, "Ma'am, please move or I'll be forced to involve the authorities." She shouted, "This is illegal. This is war." But the driver was calm. He radioed a second vehicle that showed up within minutes, another officer, probably called in as a precaution. The same deputy from earlier stepped out of the squad car and sighed. "Again, ma'am?" He walked over to me, looked at the property line, then nodded to the tow driver. "Proceed." Karen was losing her mind. She grabbed her laminated HOA papers again, waving them in front of everyone. "This is protected land. I'm authorized to be here." The officer raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, unless your HOA now owns a tow zone, your vehicle is about to be relocated." The driver hit the controls. The chains clinked. The ramp lowered. Her BMW was slowly, dramatically, being lifted. Karen stood frozen, silent for once, watching her prized car being tilted onto a flatbed like it was a scene from her worst nightmare. And then she screamed. Not a regular scream. Not an angry scream. A dramatic, high-pitched wail that made birds fly out of the trees and echoed across the entire lake. By now, neighbors had begun to peek from their porches. A couple from across the lake got in a paddleboat to come closer. A guy walking his dog stopped and started recording with his phone. Karen's meltdown was becoming a live performance. The tow driver secured her car with a second chain and ratchet, ignoring her screams. Karen ran up to the officer, trying to block him with her body. "You're enabling a criminal. He stole my boat and now my car." The officer calmly replied, "Ma'am, this man owns the land, the dock, and the access ramp. He has every right to remove trespassing property. You were given multiple warnings. "But I'm the HOA chairwoman," she barked. "Ma'am, your HOA has no power here. You are not above the law," the officer said. As the flatbed pulled away with her BMW, Karen slumped onto the gravel, genuinely crying now. Not fake tears, real ones. Frustrated, humiliated, and furious. She sat there, holding her clipboard like it was her last shred of authority. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. But the truth was, this wasn't just about a boat or a parking space. This was about entitlement. Karen had gone out of her way to trample boundaries, literal and legal. And now, the consequences had arrived in the form of a towboat and a tow truck. As things calmed down, the officer gave her one final warning. If you call 911 again under false pretenses, you will be charged. Today, you're lucky we're letting you walk away with just citations for trespassing and obstruction. She said nothing. Just sniffled and walked slowly down the road, her HOA reign suddenly feeling a lot smaller. Days later, I received a letter in the mail. Not from Karen, but from her HOA board. It was a formal apology, stamped and signed, stating that Karen had acted alone, outside her authority, and that their rules did not apply to non-HOA properties. They also said they'd be revisiting leadership structure in the coming weeks. Translation: Karen was probably getting voted out. I printed the letter and pinned it to my shed wall like a trophy. But the story didn't end there. Carl, the towboat guy, became a bit of a local legend for the way he handled Karen's boat. Someone had filmed part of the incident, and it made its way onto a local Facebook group titled Lake Life Drama. The video had thousands of views within hours. My dock became the unlikely setting of a viral showdown between property rights and HOA arrogance. People I'd never met came up to me at the grocery store and said, "Hey, you're the guy from the lake video, right?" One even joked, "Next time she docks on your property, just install a catapult." I chuckled but took the situation seriously. I added 2 new signs to my dock: private property, tow enforced, and no Karen zone. I also had motion-activated cameras installed, just in case someone got bold again. Since that day, the lake's been peaceful. My dock remains clear, my boat safe. And Karen? I haven't seen her or her pontoon once since. But every now and then, when the wind carries a faint scream across the water, I smile. Because I'll always remember the day HOA Karen tried to take over my dock, and ended up watching her BMW fly away instead.